In the second video on Python classes, we're going to go over decorator methods along with magic methods. Decorator methods, we're going to start with those. So we're going to create a class method first. Before we get started with that, I'm going to set a new class variable. As you recall, there's class variables are defined in the top section, and then the instance method that will be the variables that change from one instance of a class to another, like the player's name. Those are set using the self keyword. And let's just go ahead and call this league. And we're going to set the default value to NFL. And then we're going to go ahead and create a class method under an offensive player. And we'll just define this as change league. And one thing that is different with the class methods is the first parameter that gets passed in is the class. Obviously, class is a reserved keyword in Python, which is why the first parameter is always CLS for class. And we'll also be taking a second parameter called league name. And since this is a class variable that we will be setting, so we need to say class.league and set that equal to league name. And obviously from the previous video, we have defined an offensive player, Russell Wilson, who is a quarterback. So what we need to do is we can go ahead and overwrite the league name. Obviously it's set to NFL. So if we want to change that. And class is something that gets passed in automatically, so we don't need to pass that. That's just handled by the way Python classes are structured. So let's set that to NCAA. Okay, so now we can save the file and run it. And one thing that we need to do to see our change is to print out the league. And obviously it's NCAA. Now, working with class variables, one thing that is really important to understand is that if we create another player, we'll set that Des Bryant. And we'll just let the defaults take care of themselves. And if we print the player, actually we want to set this to player 2. Otherwise, it's going to overwrite the original player instance that we have. And then if we save that and go ahead and run it, then from every class instance from that point forward, since we changed the class variable, that means every single offensive player class will be set to NCAA. So it was originally NFL, but every class variable carries forward to future instances of classes that we declare. The next thing we'll be covering are static methods. So we can just create a decorator called static method. And static method is pretty self-explanatory. They do not require any keywords like self or class to be passed in, and they pretty much do some sort of instruction that has nothing to do with any of the class or instance variables. So let's do a static method called getPositions. And let's just return all the positions that an offensive player can possibly have. Okay, so we're returning a list of positions for offensive players. And so we can just go ahead and print this out. Now let's go ahead and comment that out. Let's go ahead and run it, and then we get that list back. The next thing we will be covering is the property decorator. So the key feature of a property decorator is it's for anything we don't have to pass any parameters in. So when the full name is being set using the init function, the constructor. So all we need to do here is set at property. And then so once we do that, we do not have to pass this in as being with a function syntax, whereas down here we're calling the full name function. But now that we've changed that to a property, we don't need the parentheses anymore. So if we go ahead and run that, then we we will still get the player's name back without having to pass the parentheses. A good use case for this is situations where, let's say you had a certain property and then you decide to switch to to something different, and you use a function to maybe combine a couple of other parameters, which is kind of what we did here. The final decorator that we will be going over is the abstract method. So before we get started editing any of our classes, we need to import the module. So the module that we will be importing is the abstract base class, which is called ABC. Actually, we're just going to import a couple things. So we're going to go from ABC import. We're going to call ABC, we're going to import ABC meta and abstract method. And so the first thing that we need to do is when we create our player class, we need to pass in the meta class. And that's going to be ABC meta. And so now that we have done this, we can go ahead and add our abstract class. So let's go ahead and create that. Our abstract method. So we need to use the decorator abstract method. And we're going to create a new function called getKeyStats. And we're just going to use the keyword pass to just pass over the function. So this creates a constraint to where any classes that extend the player class, which in this case will be the defensive player class and the offensive player class, they must define this exact function. Now we have our players that we created down here. So if we go ahead and try and run this, we're going to get a bit of a problem because we did not instantiate that class. And so we will be getting this type error. So this method, we must define this in both classes. So let's go ahead and create that. And we do need, let's go ahead and pass in self. And now we can just return a tuple. And we'll just pass in our stats, passing yards, receiving yards, and rushing yards. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and run it. We can go ahead and print the key stats out as well. And notice that we did not get an error because we did meet our obligation to create that method. And if we save and run, then we're going to get all the yardage that we originally passed in. So in order for a defensive player to work, we are going to have to create the same method for that. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we'll go ahead and print the player that we had from the last example. And then now that one should work also. And we go ahead and print the key stats for this player as well. And obviously, since they are different between offensive players and defensive players, we're going to get the correct stats back when we call this function. One final thing I wanted to mention regarding abstract classes or abstract methods is that if we go and so we create an abstract method in our base class, which is our player class. So let's go ahead and try and create a player, just a generic player. And we'll just be very quickly just pass in some parameters. And then if we go ahead and try and run this and create the new player, we are going to get an error. So what this does is this enforces us to not use the base class and then one of the extended classes instead. This is important because the base class, what we want is to create a baseline of all the things about a player that are going to be the same regardless of what type of player it is. But we do not want anybody to create a player from the base class because they have to be in either one of the extended categories. So this is one good way of using the abstract method to enforce this policy or this rule. The final thing that we will be covering are magic methods. Now we have been using one magic method the entire time, which is the init method. And magic methods are different because they contain the double underscores. So init is something that gets triggered automatically. Every time we create a new instance of any of these classes, then init will happen automatically without us having to manually call it. So it is the constructor that sets a certain number of variables every time we create a new instance. All these variables are required. There are several others. Actually, there are many others, but we're just going to go over a few of them here, just the most common ones that you'll be running into day in and day out. So if we just print player, what's happening is we're basically getting something that is not really all that readable. It's just an object with the instance ID of that object. Now we can't force this to happen. We can create a another thing that these magic methods are called are dunders because they have the double underscore. So we can just create one for string value. So we're going to go underscore underscore stir. And then so since it's an instance method, we do need to pass in self. And what we're going to return is the string value. So we're going to convert to a string self as dictionary. So then now if we run using the string method, we're going to get the exact same thing. So this gives us a little bit more. Instead of just the object with the ID that it's stored in memory, we're actually getting the data back in a more readable format. And there's one other method that's similar. That one's called repr. And since we have complete control over this, we can actually do the same thing. This is more for internal use. Actually, let me just comment that out and try and run this. We're going to get the exact same thing that we had previously, which should be the object instance. Obviously, that's what we got right here. So what happens is if there's no repr that is created, it can default back to the just the default that it had for that along with the string method. So if we go ahead and create this, and then if we rerun this file, we are going to get the exact same thing. However, according to the Python documentation, this is generally not a good practice. The built-in function was supposed to be the official string representation of the object, so it should be like a valid Python expression. And what they mean is that it's going to look and exactly like you're recreating the object. So if we were to run it as Python code, it would just create the object. So what we're going to need is inside this function, we're going to need the class name, and we can do that one of two ways. We can use that and then pass in our parameters like our first name, last name, and so on. There's another way that we can do that. We can just use string interpolation. So let's just call self, and we're going to go underscore underscore class and double underscore name. So that's just going to be the same thing as returning to us offensive player. And so inside here, what we're going to need is to pass in the parameters that we used when we call the init method. Let's just go ahead and copy several of these. So we're going to need passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards. And then if we save and then rerun the file, and okay, so there's a bit of an issue. We forgot to do the formatter. And what we need to pass in is self. So let's go ahead and rerun this. Actually, we need to pass in self as a keyword parameter. So self equals self. And hopefully this time it will work. And as you can see, we got our results, offensive player. So in other words, we can go ahead and recreate this. We did make a mistake. We forgot the quotes around the string. So we need to go ahead and add that. And since we've used single quotes, we'll use double quotes. And my editor keeps forcing in two of them. We save that and rerun that. Then we'll get something that we can just basically copy and paste into our code file, and it will just work. So what we can do with this, okay, so these are going to be different for every single class, but what we can do with the stir method is just put that inside the base class. So if we rerun that, since they're all going to be the same, we're just getting the dictionary value of all the properties and values. We go ahead and run that and get our same thing again. So I think we'll leave it at that. There's some other magic methods that we could use, but these three are by far the most common. And this concludes the videos covering Python classes. Thank you for watching.